Hello and welcome to Glitterature Alley. I am Tootight Lautrec, the drag laureate of Glitterature Alley, and here we are at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainder section of an unnamed local library, which may or may not have a couple of grizzled lions sitting on the front steps with a distinct look of wanderlust in their eyes. And they're here to help see us through this last list of Pulitzer Prize winning fiction, of which I have been heretofore unfamiliar, as I wrap up the series Pulitzer Who over the next few weeks. After the monumentally boring 1949 winner, Guard of Honor by James Gould Cousins, we proceed to the 1950 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, The Way West by A.B. Guthrie Jr., which is, I'll give you a hint, a really well-written book. But before I get into the nuts and bolts of that, let's look at a few other books that were published in 1949, which were the competitors for The Way West. We have The Fires of Spring by James Michener, Like Lesser Gods by Mary Tomasi, The Man with the Golden Arm by Nelson Algren, Oh, Shepherd Speak by, of course, Upton Sinclair, The Oasis by Mary McCarthy, Place Called Esterville by Erskine Caldwell, Pride's Castle by Frank Yerby, A Rage to Live by John O'Hara, Shane by Jack Schaefer, and The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles. But that was published in that year, but I don't think it was really in contention for the Pulitzer because even though it's about Americans, it's set in North Africa and it doesn't really fulfill the American-centric qualities that the Pulitzer Prize is particularly going for. But the winner in 1950 is A.B. Guthrie's The Way West. Now, A.B. Guthrie, Alfred Bertram Bud Guthrie, was born January 13th, 1901, and he died April 26, 1991. He was a novelist, a screenwriter, a poet, a historian, a journalist. He did it all. He was born in Indiana, but he moved with his parents as a child to Chateau, Montana, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Chateau, Montana. And as a young man, he went to Kentucky and lived and worked there for 21 years until at the very tender age of 43, he won a scholarship, or rather a fellowship, to write for a year, to write fiction for a year at Harvard University. And so he went to Harvard, and there he wrote his very first novel called Big Sky, which was made into a movie starring Kirk Douglas. And after that, he wrote The Way West, which was also made into a movie with Kirk Douglas, Robert Mitchum, Richard Widmark, and Sally Field. So I don't know why I've never heard of this before because it has been, quite famous, but, maybe I just need to get out there. Don't know. After that, he went to Hollywood, and wrote the Academy Award nominated screenplay to the book Shane, which was one of his competitors in 1949 for the 1950 prize, Jack Schaefer. And that, as I said, was nominated for an Academy Award. So this A.B. Guthrie obviously was a real dummy. Couldn't get ahead in life, I suppose. This book, The Way West, is the story of a wagon train of pioneers led mostly by two men, Lige Evans, it's spelled Lige, which apparently is a Dutch name, Lige Evans and Dick Summers. Now, Evans and his wife Rebecca and their 17-year-old son Brownie are strong, silent, contemplative, respectable people with common sense and a humanistic moral core. And Dick Summers is a wild, adventurous sort who also happens to be a pretty good guy, too. There are a number of other families among the pioneers that are headed west with varying levels of goodness, badness, and ugliness. And this is their story of this group of people as they travel from Missouri to Oregon in the mid 1800s, about 1850, with dramas large and small along the way. Now, the tension in the story is baked in because it is a travel narrative. And so, when, if, and how they reach their destination is the driving force of the book. But, and it's a tight but, along with the overarching goal of reaching a destination, anytime you bring together a group of people who have really only one thing in common, which is getting to where they're going, there will be disagreements, there will be entanglements, there will be drama, intrigue, power struggles along the way. And so, as I said, it's an exceedingly well written book that is contemplative, beautifully descriptive, and really quite heartfelt. And it explores the human condition with all of its glories and its foibles. Um, we get pride, we get humility, we get lust, we get jealousy, we get shame, and all with humor and intelligence and a searing sense of what it means to seek for what you actually want. Now, because it's a Western novel in the Western tradition, um, and it involves people traveling over and into the land that is occupied and owned by other people, there is, of course, the 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 trope of the cowboy and Indian um, genre, which I find somewhat unsettling because ever since I can remember, whenever I've seen a cowboy and Indian type of interaction, I've always kind of rooted for the Indians. And that may be because I root for the underdog, but it may also be because I particularly root for an underdog that is manly and shirtless, which in most of the movies, the Indians are. So the dismissiveness and denigration and the violence perpetrated against the native peoples in this book is unsettling. And yet, there is, I think, in here enough of the recognition that they and other races um, deserve the respect that all humans deserve, that I felt that Guthrie was depicting situations more for the drama of the story and not as his own personal view, or at least that's what I've convinced myself of. It seems like he is a really quite a good-hearted person, and there are enough people who recognize the human dignity that everyone deserves in this book among these characters that I get that sense that he does too. So along with this, though, there is the the rampant racial slur that today we call the N-word that is peppered throughout in this book. But curiously enough, it's used mostly by the white pioneers in self-referential ways about themselves. Alternatively, with the use of the word child. So you might get a man talking about home on the range, and he says, this child was scared to death, meaning he himself, or this racial slur reckoned it was safer to go this away rather than that away. And so while this word appears frequently, and it is quite jarring, it became more of a curiosity to me than a real offense, even though it is an offensive term. But besides these objections, I actually really enjoyed this novel. It's very sensual, and by sensual, I do mean the five senses, but by sensual, I also do mean that it's also quite sexual. And it deals with sex in a way that it deals with sex as a natural aspect of life that can at times feel like a personal battle or can at times feel like a balm, which it can be in our lives as we know. And just to give you a sense of the lushness of this book and also the a little bit of the linguistic beauty of it, um, I will give you a short passage where we get a little bit more in-depth introduction to Lige and Rebecca's son, Brownie, who I said is 17 years old, and he happens to have a crush on a girl named Mercy. His name was Brownie Evans, and he was 17, and the dust rose under the slow feet of the cattle and powdered a man's skin and filled his nose, and the sun bore through, hot as a near fire, though summer was just coming on, until his neck and cheeks and hands turned dark as the saddle he rode on. The dust phlegmed the throat and gritted between the teeth. It settled in the ears, feeling like meal under the fingers that tried to clear it out. Keep footin' it, critters. Stay with the bunch, you. Get along. Far off, on sky lines clear as water, heat waves ran. His name was Brownie Evans, and he was 17 and bound for Oregon. And this hand that held the reins was his, this fixing of bone and joint and broken nails made to answer his orders. And the feet in the peg boots were his, and the arms in the shirt, and the legs in the homespun pants, and he lived inside himself, under the ribs or beneath the skull, thinking thoughts and feeling feelings like maybe hadn't been thought or felt before. They were so kind of crazy. Then he goes through a part where he names the names of other people on the travels with him, and he tells us their names. But to know a name wasn't to know a man. The man lay deep inside his name, underneath his talk and acts, as he did himself, who went by the name of Brownie Evans, and spoke and moved like everybody else, but still lived secret and alone. People would say he was skinny and big-jointed and had too much of him turned under for feet. Or they might say he was friendly and good-termed but bashful, but they wouldn't know him. He couldn't let them know him, for it would be the same as standing naked and maybe not looking like other folks, but looking outlandish and shameful. What a person wondered was, were other people like him underneath, or more likely solider and properer, and not moved by crazy notions? So I find that just a really, really wonderful description of a teenager who's besotted with a girl and thinking thoughts about love and lust and sexuality, and also where he fits in the world and how to handle all of these feelings with all these other people around him. So, what kept me reading and what stopped me reading? Well, as you've just heard, the language, which I found quite beautiful, the technique with which he tells a story also is quite beautiful. Being with the characters kept me reading. I wanted to stay with them. I wanted to be in their company as I wandered through the book. And also the desire to know if they would reach their goal, and if and when they did reach the goal, how they would find it once they arrived. Now, I've talked a little bit before about how tension and conflict are usually the drivers of any story, and that is true. But these other two aspects of fiction, beautiful language and the desire to be around the characters who are in the story, are more nebulous qualities that also kept me reading. And I've been thinking about it quite a bit lately about what fiction should do. A fiction writer wants to give readers well-wrought language that is witty or fresh or interesting, but that also tells a story. You want to give readers something to think about in terms of the human condition, so that your reaction that you would want from a reader is that they say, oh, that is really true, or I would never, or what the heck is going on here? Or as Flannery O'Connor's neighbor once said to her, that just goes to show what some people will do. And those are the types of reactions that you think you might want in a reader. They're the types of reactions that I, as a reader, often have. But as a fiction writer, you also want to give your readers characters who are interesting and or fun or maddening or so complicated that your readers will want to follow them through the entire book. And the danger for the writer is that sometimes what interests the writer doesn't always interest the reader. And case in point would be the last book that I discussed, which is James Gould Cousins' guard of honor. I got the sense as I was reading that he was in love with his own language, and he couldn't help but pat himself on the back on every page in between doors opening and closing, um, because he found himself on an Air Force base, and he found that so intensely interesting that he couldn't see what a bore it could be with all of this language and all of this um, description without any kind of story to carry the rest of it through. Dry, dusty language has no place in a book as far as I'm concerned. Writers should charm their readers. They should entertain their readers. They should genuinely somehow move their readers. And there is a desperate fear that many writers, or at least one particular writer that I happen to know intimately, that they may be pleasing themselves more than they please their readers. It's like being on a bad date where the person just talks about themselves and they find themselves intensely interesting, but they're a big yawn to the people who are having to suffer their presence. Thankfully, Guthrie's language and settings and characterizations are interesting and thought-provoking, and they were, for me, a downright pleasure to read. Qualms. Do I have qualms? Well, yes. Racism, which is unfortunately and indisputably part of the American experience, rears its ugly head here too. But as I said before, I do believe that Guthrie's depictions of it are more reportorial than they are editorial. I don't think that they are firmly held beliefs for Guthrie. They're still unsettling, and perhaps they should be unsettling. So maybe for that we can thank him. Do I recommend? I do. Readers who love the Western genre, readers like Roy Reads Anything or Greg from Ghost Readers in the Sky, will love this book, but also everyone who loves literary fiction will also love this book, I think. It's really very well done. And whether you're into the Western genre or not, I didn't necessarily think that I would enjoy it, but I ended up thinking it was quite fine. Guthrie is definitely a writer who sees the wonder in the world, and he paid attention to it, as we should too, every day, because the wonder is all around us. Pay attention. Until we meet again, happy trails to you. I am Tootight Lautrec. Mwah.